say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good morning, friends. My name is Rochelle Crow, and I had the honor of serving in the Senate with Senator Scott Bennett. On each session day, we began the Senate with pledge and prayer. This was important to Scott Bennett, so much so that he preferred being the pledge leader. It was the reaffirmation each day that we were all called there to serve that he appreciated. So today I ask that as we pledge allegiance, that you do it with the same enthusiasm that Pledge Leader Bennett would have. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Good morning. I'm Chancellor Robert Jones, and I have the very solemn privilege of opening this ceremony in memory of Senator Scott Bennett. I realize that Fullinger Great Hall is most often a place that people equate with music and celebration, but I think is more importantly recognized and revered because it is a place that lets our entire community come together for moments in our lives that are more powerful when they are shared with family and friends. This is one of those moments for many of us who knew Scott Bennett. To Stacy, I will be the first of several today, and the latest in a long line of those who have already done so, to tell you how very sorry I am for your loss. I know thoughts and prayers may not directly take away your sadness, but I truly believe they can lighten the burden for at least a little while. And this hall is very full of people who want to do nothing more than that for all of you right now. You know, relatively speaking to the rest of those who will be on this podium today, I have not known Scott as long or perhaps as well. But while I may have come to know him only in the recent years, but each time that I had the great pleasure of meeting with him, it left me with a great desire to be anxious to get to know him just a little bit better. So I'm going to keep my own remarks and my comments very brief so that we can hear from the stories and the tributes from those who have known him best. But I will say that in the course of more than 43 years in higher education, I have seen very, very many legislators across several states. I've seen very, very good ones, and I've known a few that were somewhat questionable as well. And it was always very easy to tell which was which by simply looking at the reflection of these individuals in their communities, in the communities that they represented. If you mention a legislator's name to someone and the reaction is a raised eyebrow or a scowl, then that certainly tells you something. If you mention them and someone's eyes lighten up or they smile, that invariably is a very good sign. And if you mention one and immediately every single person, every single time smiles and starts to tell you a personal story about that individual, you know you have someone that is very, very special representing you and your community. So that has been my Scott Bennett experience since the day that I arrived, both personally and through the stories of every person I've met when his name comes up. Whether he was working with our university and our community, helping all of us to safely navigate the worst global health crisis in living memory, or whether he was spending a lazy Sunday afternoon during a very hectic legislative session talking with me and other leaders in higher education about our proposal. Scott Bennett, the senator, always came behind Scott Bennett, the good neighbor, the trusted friend, the quiet advocate, and the Scott Bennett who didn't just represent the community, but was also truly very much a part of it. And I certainly hope that every person in this room realizes that Scott was an unwavering friend and supporter of this university, and more specifically our students, our faculty, and our staff who make up this great institution. But that isn't why I am standing here today. You see, because I don't necessarily care which party he joined or which vote he took. What truly mattered to me, and I think matters to most of you, is that we simply knew that we could trust him when it came down to making decisions about the things that mattered the most. And I suspect that is also why so many of you are mourning his loss together today. In remembrance of a great man who has touched us all, who has touched this entire state and I believe this nation, I ask that you join me in a moment of personal and private reflection and a moment of silence in Scott's memory. Thank you. So again, thanks to all of you for coming together in Senator Bennett's memory. Now it is my privilege to invite a very familiar face to the podium to share his own thoughts about Scott Bennett's life and legacy. Please welcome Governor Pritzker. Governor, thank you for joining this service. It is my great pleasure to ask you to offer some remarks and wishes to the Bennett family. Governor Pritzker.
Good morning. Today we come together to honor and celebrate a loving husband and father to Stacy, Sam, and Emma, a genuinely beloved friend, a kind and good-hearted man, and a highly respected public servant. The fact that so many of us are here today to honor Scott's memory is just one symbol of how widely well-regarded he was and how close to him so many of us have felt. In many ways, his legacy is in the memories that we have of him and the impact that he has had on all of us. Scott was an incredibly effective lawmaker, in part because he infused humor into our lives while demonstrating the most enviable traits like extraordinary integrity and radical compassion. He could always break through an awkward silence or a tense moment with a clever quip. When things got heated, as they sometimes do under the dome, we could always count on Scott for a good dad joke. Earlier this year, there was a debate on the Senate floor over the naming of the milk snake as the state's official snake. During that debate, somehow partisanship and disagreement took over and everyone stopped focusing on the subject at hand. Scott rose to address the chamber, and addressing his colleagues, he said, "Does your milk snake bring all the boys to the yard?" And just like here, the entire chamber erupted in laughter. Scott always knew how to inject humor at just the right moment to lighten things up. He represented his constituents with a rare personal touch. He knew their names, he knew their families, he knew their stories. He was a vigorous advocate for the people of his district and more broadly for the people of Illinois. But it was always the people who were most vulnerable, those who needed a champion, for whom Scott had the most compassion. I'm reminded of a bill that he championed allowing comfort dogs in courtrooms to help children deal with the stress of testifying in a legal proceeding. That very insight, to advocate for children suffering anxiety, is what made him not only a remarkable legislator, but also an exceptional human being. Stacy, Sam, and Emma, I know that it seems like this feeling of grief will never go away. And I've been in your shoes. I lost my father when he was 39 and I was 7. The pain is intense and the loss is bewildering. Early on, there will be moments when the well-intentioned words from friends are not enough to ease the sorrow that you're feeling. But I promise you that there will come a day when this pain eases, especially because Scott was such a special and unique and loving husband and father and friend. In the not too distant future, the wonderful and precious memories you shared with him will begin to bring more of a smile to your faces than an ache to your hearts. When Sam or Emma does something that so closely resembles the exact way Scott would have done it, you may even laugh. You will always miss him, but the reminders of him will feel like they're more about how he loved you more than anything in the world. You will find him in the farms that you pass on your way to work or school. You'll run into people whose lives he made better. And you'll hear his favorite songs, and you'll smile. This room is full today because Scott touched our lives in a special way. And for many years to come, in some small way, we will get to return the favor. All of us will be a reminder of his light, his love, and his hope for you. May Scott's memory be a blessing, and may we all carry on Scott's legacy by living up to his values. On December 9th, I ordered flags lowered across the state to honor Senator Scott Bennett. And on behalf of a grateful state, I now invite Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly to present Scott's family with the state flag flown over the state capitol building that day as a symbol of our gratitude for his true and faithful service. And now I'd like to bring to the podium Senate President Don Harmon.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Stacy, for allowing me a few moments to speak on behalf of Scott's Senate family. Part of serving in the roles we do is attending all sorts of events that, truth be told, we wish we didn't have to attend. And let's all face it, we all wish that things were different and that we weren't here today. But it was at these types of events where you would find Scott Bennett leaning over and sharing a joke or an observation that was both so funny and possibly so entirely inappropriate to the setting that you would struggle to stifle your laughter while being so appreciative to have Scott as a friend. I can easily imagine Scott looking out at this tremendous crowd and tapping me or Rochelle or Pat McGuire on the shoulder, leaning in and saying, they know there's no free food, right? Senator Scott Bennett was a unique creature. In an era of soaring political egos and red meat rhetoric, Scott proudly took a different path. Self-deprecating and disarming, his humor broke down barriers to find common ground that then allowed his intellect and everyday kindness to shine. He was a skilled lawyer who knew the ins and outs of courtrooms and could translate that into practical solutions and legislation. He had toiled as an obscure staffer in an obscure White House office, so he was always kind and appreciative of the work our staff does day in and day out. He was first and foremost a good and decent human being who brought that graciousness to public office and who prided himself on constituent service and following through for the people he had the honor to represent in the Illinois Senate. He understood that education lifts people up, and so he fought to make college more affordable and more accessible. He was an environmentalist who built bipartisan support to protect the Muhammad Aquifer and keep local drinking water safe. His common sense compassion came through in his work to allow the use of comfort dogs in courtrooms to ease the stress of children testifying. Everyone here today has a Scott Bennett story or joke. If I started, I wouldn't know where or when to end, so I'm going to leave most of the storytelling to others. In thinking of Scott, I'm reminded how basketball coach Jim Valvano once said we should do 3 things every day. Number 1 is to laugh. We should laugh every day. Number 2 is think. Spend some time each day in thought. And number 3 is to allow our emotions to move us to tears. Like you, I will do all 3 of these things today, many times over, remembering Scott. It reveals how deep and how positive an impact he had on all of us. This has allowed me to begin to find some solace as I struggle to come to terms with his passing. And perhaps that's Scott's final gift to us all. In remembering him and telling his stories, we reflect on his wonderful spirit and hopefully try to emulate his approach to public service and to life in general. In knowing him, he has made us all better people, and in doing so, he will live on. Before I go, I can't help but to share my last conversation with Scott. We were on the floor of the Senate debating the pretrial fairness bill he'd worked so long and so hard to prepare. Without Scott's sensibility and sensitivity, I'm not sure we'd have been able to pass it. As I stood at my desk waiting for my turn to speak, the presiding officer recognized Scott. Scott gave the quintessential Scott Bennett floor speech. It was funny and sharp and unflinching in taking on the difficult issues before us. He called out the shortcomings of others' arguments. It was a magnificent speech, and even before he was done, I withdrew my request to speak. The only thing unusual about Scott's remarks is that he called out senators opposed to the bill by name, which under our rules allows them to rejoin the debate a second time. As the debate was winding down, Scott wandered back to my desk and apologized for naming names and prolonging debate. I told him his speech was so good that I put away my microphone. There was simply nothing left to say. I yield my time to Senator Bennett, I said, as he walked down the aisle chuckling. I yield my time to Senator Bennett. Oh, how we would gladly all do that today if only we could. You are beloved by your Senate family. Godspeed, my friend. So say we all, Godspeed. I'd like to bring Mayor Deb Finan up to the microphone next.
Thank you to Stacy, Emma, and Sam, and the entire Bennett family for asking me to speak today about my friend, Senator Scott Bennett. As we join them here in our collective grief to remember Senator Bennett's life and legacy, I think about how as a community, we have so many overlapping experiences with him. Senator Bennett was simply Scott to our entire community because he knew and touched each of us. As someone said last week, I have talked to 100 people who thought Scott Bennett was their best friend, and they were all right. He was deeply invested in all of us and in making Champaign and Vermilion County and the state of Illinois a better place. He was a champion for the most marginalized in our community and an advocate for us all. He was the guy who was always willing to tell you the truth. And even when it was something you didn't want to hear, he delivered the message with kindness and humor that allowed you to see the other side and left the door open for more discussion. Scott was incredibly smart. I never saw him with notes, but he was always prepared with the relevant facts in his head for any speech he needed to give. He was also the guy that could read the room like no other. And when everyone else had talked for too long and the event was dragging on, he was the one who would get up and summarize his speech in a minute or so, taking pride that he helped us get out of there on time. Much has been said about Scott's wit and humor. It was such a part of who he was. You knew he cared about you if he made fun of you. I have seen so many photographs of all of us politicians lined up for the official photo where everyone is turned toward Scott. His hand is conspiratorially over his mouth as he leans in and whispers something hilarious. I can see that sideways glance he would give. I can hear his voice getting a little bit higher and his giggle in my mind as I think of those moments, and I bet you can too. Scott was also special because he didn't buy into party politics. Yes, he was a loyal Democrat, but more important to him than what party you belonged to was your heart and the work you were trying to do. Scott reached across the aisle to work with everyone and anyone that had similar goals to him. He also took the time and understand and listen to those who didn't. Scott loved his work and he loved his friends and his family. On April 9th, he wrote on Facebook, "The spring legislative session adjourned today in the early hours. Thankful for a productive session in this beautiful place and looking forward to spending time with family back home." As I thought about what to say today, that sentiment and the line in Scott's obituary that spoke about his final act of service, safely driving his family home from the airport after their vacation, stood out to me because it was exactly the Scott that I knew. The countless times that we talked or texted, it was always clear that his family was the most important thing in his life. He drove home during sessions so he could spend time with them. He was present even with the demands of his job, and they were his reason for being. This fall, Katie Blakeman and I and Scott were at an Edgar Fellows event in Chicago. It ended late. He chose to drive home rather than spend the night because he wanted to be home with his family. And so we wouldn't worry. He texted us a photo from the night once he arrived back in Champaign to let us know he was home. So today, my message to Scott is, Senator, rest easy. We are not worried. We know you are safely home. And it is my honor to introduce Representative Tom Bennett, Scott's uncle.
That is a beautiful picture, isn't it? It captures his smile, his grace. Thank you, Champaign Mayor Finan, for all that you're doing for Champaign County and for all that you're doing. My name is Tom Bennett, and I am one of Scott's uncles. Thank you for being here. We're so grateful for your concerns and prayers of support. The many touching stories we have heard about Scott over the last few days were just so amazing. The outpouring of support from family and friends in Scott's district, legislators, others around the state, Governor Pritzker, Treasurer Frerichs, Senator President Don Harmon, Senator McGuire, and still others have been so helpful and most kind. Scott has meant so much to so many, but also you have touched Scott's heart and his mind and helped shape him as well. He related to people in so many ways. He was humble, he was compassionate, he loved people, and he listened and was just a funny storyteller. He helped you feel special. He had a way to break the tension in a room and help the conversation move forward. Scott was a husband, a father, a son, a nephew, a brother, a student, a lawyer, a state senator, a big University of Illinois fan, a truck driver on the farm, a tough pit car player, a political analyst, a dear friend, a leader, and really so much more. Scott loved Stacy and Sam and Emma and often talked about them. His stories were beautiful, they were fun, and just, oh, so human. So human. He was just so very, very proud of them. At an early age, he had a special bond with Grandma Bennett, if I may. They both had the same birthday, July 16th. It became a tradition that they would go to Red Lobster to celebrate. That was Grandma Bennett's favorite place to go. So when the General Assembly was in session, there was only one place in Springfield for Scott and me to go for dinner as well. This is not a commercial. But it was Red Lobster. It was a great day when we both took our oath of office in 2015. We both knew there would be a day that we would not be in the General Assembly. But we both knew that he would always be my nephew, and I'd always be his uncle. Having two Bennetts in the General Assembly created some interesting situations at times. Now, Senator Bennett and I did not always vote the same way on things. Two Bennetts in different parts of the General Assembly voting differently could create some confusion for constituents on who voted and how they voted. But usually, Scott was very patient. Well, he always was. Very patient, very kind, and making sure that the people that would call to make sure they understood who voted what the issues were, and work through that. And we tried to do the very same things in our office as well. There were times that people would say to us, wait, Senator Bennett is a wild, far-left liberal Democrat in the Senate. And you're a crazy, far-right conservative Republican in the House. How can you be in the same family? What's it like at the family gatherings? Do you fight at the dinner table? This mental picture in my mind, just gracious. But no, it's just all about family. Yes, when we would get together for family birthdays and holidays, Scott and I would take a few minutes to talk about state politics, and then it was family. There could be as many as 20 or 25 of us or so together, laughing and eating, telling stories, singing, playing at least one serious pit card game. Scott was usually right in the middle somewhere. And then there's the family farm. Over the last several years, Scott would drive a semi hauling grain to the local elevator. And he was so proud the day that he got a CDL license. And when he was on the farm during harvest and waiting for his semi to fill up, he would send emails and phone calls to Springfield, constituents, and others. And of course, he would make sure he had time to talk to Uncle Doug about the farm equipment, about fertilizer, seed, and the very serious market prices that were up and down. He loved the harvest, best time of the year. His love of family and people and life was oh so strong. If I may, in Corinthians, the 13th chapter, God has a beautiful way of talking about what love is. And see if this sounds familiar. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not easily angered. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. We've all seen these in Scott and how he talked and listened with others. And God also talks about his love for us. In the book of Romans, the 8th chapter, for I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither heights nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation can separate us from the love of our Lord God. I'd like to close with a couple of words here from Jesus in John 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, also believe in me. My Father's house has many rooms. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me. We do not understand all that has happened, but we are so grateful for Scott being in our lives. He's been just such a gift. He helped us to be better people. May we keep Scott's precious memories and his love for people near to our hearts to make a difference in the lives of those around us, while also knowing that we will one day all to be together with our Scott, our loved ones, and our Lord God. I'm so glad to introduce Champaign County State's Attorney, Julia Reeds. Julia.
Good morning. My friend Scott Bennett reminds me of a British philosopher that we have all been familiar with since childhood. Kind, humble, loyal, gentle, protective of the children in his care, funny at the right time, and above all else, a very good friend. That philosopher, Winnie the Pooh, might have been speaking of Scott when he said, "How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard." I have known Scott since 2010, when I met him on the sidewalk outside of the Champaign County Courthouse. He was relatively new in town, working in private practice, and had recently lost a county board race to another friend. I knew that he had a strong political background and had served as an assistant state's attorney in McLean County before coming to Champaign to join a private practice firm. So naturally, as a politician, I was concerned that his next campaign would be against me. But as we talked on the sidewalk outside of the courthouse and then later at lunch, I learned that Scott understood the value of relationships, and instead of an opponent, I found a friend. And when I had the opportunity, I stole him away, offered him a job as a prosecutor in my office. Scott was only with me for 3 years before he was appointed to his Senate seat, but in that 3 years, he accomplished so much. In our office family, Scott was the big teddy bear, always with a laugh when we needed it, always there to pitch in. But he also was a grizzly bear as a prosecutor. We deal with the worst of the worst, and Scott took on some of the most difficult cases, prosecuting people who had abused children, maybe the heffalumps. Scott met with those children for weeks prior to the trials. He played board games and colored, and he let them get comfortable with him so that they trusted him when it came time to talk about the most traumatic event that they had experienced. He made them safe, and in doing so, he made our community safer. When Scott had the opportunity to be appointed to the Senate, I was supportive, even though I would be losing a valuable member of my staff, because I knew he would be an influence statewide and he would take his experience as a prosecutor with him. When he interviewed for the appointment, he told our party chair, Al Klein, that the most satisfying part of the job was negotiation, not the glamour of trial work. As Al said, Scott said he liked getting people to a position where they could say, this isn't what I wanted, but I can see a way forward. So Scott took his ability to find that middle ground, along with his passion for protecting children, with him when he went to the Senate. We have heard, and we see in this beautiful picture, Scott worked to protect children across Illinois by passing legislation to allow comfort dogs in courtrooms and extend the statute of limitations for the prosecution of child sex offenders. He was instrumental in the creation of a children's advocacy center in Vermilion County, where we interviewed children who were victims of abuse. He served on the board and raised funds so that the children of Vermilion County could have that protection. And he also volunteered his own time to serve as a court-appointed special advocate for children who are in foster care here in our community. He did that in addition to all the things he was doing. And while he was doing all of this good work as our state senator, he was also in private practice at Spiros Law. And it's important not to forget that. Just as he was in my office, he was known for being a talented trial attorney who could think on his feet, and also as a coworker whose lighthearted, humble humor cut through the stress and lit up the rooms. Miranda Susi, one of the attorneys and partners at Spiros, told me that they all knew if they had a case that involved difficult situations with children or someone who had lost a loved one, that they could tap him on the shoulder and he would go right in the room and make that person feel like they were listened to, like they had a friend there to support them. And as much as Scott poured his heart into children who had suffered trauma, he also found time to mentor young people who were trying to make a difference in their communities. We all have been so comforted since Scott's passing by the tributes and memories that have been shared. As a mutual friend said, no matter the length or depth of the relationship, Scott showed up as himself and genuinely cared. One of those tributes that stands out to me was what I read in Sunday's News Gazette. a nomination for Person of the Year written by Isaiah Easton, a Danville High School student. Isaiah said Scott was a resource and a mentor for the Future Problem Solvers team, a program of young people who work to make positive changes in the Danville community. Isaiah said Scott never failed to show up, as recently as days before his passing, for a lunch honoring retired teachers. He said Scott always listened with an open mind, a full heart, and a desire to help empower students from a small town to make a difference. Politically, we all know Scott was a moderate, and a friend who's here recently described to me being a moderate politically as like being in the middle of a two-lane road with traffic going both ways. You get hit from both sides. Scott fought when it was the right thing to do and compromised when that was the way to solve problems. He preferred to sit down and talk out the issue, much like our philosopher bear would sit on a log with Christopher Robin or Piglet and solve the problems of the world over some honey. Most recently, Scott ended up on the forefront of negotiations to amend the Pretrial Fairness Act. Surrounded by tigers and rabbits and Eeyores, Scott focused on solving the problem. I might have been part of the problem sometimes. In his last text conversation with Mayor Finan, he told her he was, quote, on a Zoom, trying to keep our friend Julia calm. So far, failing. When people protested outside of his office, he invited them in to talk over the issues over a tray of cookies. He was quite troubled they didn't take him up on that offer. But in the end, his work starting the conversation led to significant compromise that resolved many of the concerns, promoted justice for all involved, and protected our communities and our citizens. We thank him for that. I will never forget the work that I've done with Scott on the Pretrial Fairness Act. Many people have remarked about how funny Scott was, but I want to point out how smart he was. Scott was an avid reader, and he shared his love of literature with his godson, buying him an appropriate book for his birthday every year and inscribing it with a thoughtful message. During a hard time in the young man's life, Scott sent him one of these appropriate books with an inscription that his mother said I could share with you. It is particularly appropriate for all of us as we face the future without him. Scott wrote, "In life, the best laid plans are disrupted, but if you push on with your head held up, you'll ultimately live a happy life after a setback. Take chances, weather the storms, keep positive, and listen to what the world is trying to teach you when things don't go your way. Above all, keep moving forward. Your friend, Scott Bennett." Pooh told his friend Piglet, "The most important thing is, even when we're apart, I'll always be with you." In his words, in his deeds, and in our hearts, our friend Scott will always be with us. May his memory always be a blessing and an inspiration as we move forward. And now it is my pleasure to invite former State Senator Pat McGuire up to give us some thoughts about Scott.
Good morning. Stacy, thank you for the opportunity to say a few words about your husband, my friend. Scott and I became friends as soon as he joined the Senate in 2015. And I quickly learned, as has been noted, that Scott was a great reader and also a most generous reader. As Julia just mentioned, Scott often gave books as gifts, and he wrote thoughtful inscriptions in those books, sometimes up to 4 pages in length. As Julia noted, he wrote to his godson, "Learn what the world is trying to teach you." Scott read voraciously to learn what the world is trying to teach. One of his favorite books was the novel All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. This book was important to Scott because of the lessons it taught about power, how power can be used to help and how power can be used to harm. So important was this book to Scott that last year he reread it, all 628 pages. Scott also learned what the world has to teach us by, as Tom noted, giving us full attention to every person he met. Scott's legacy of amazing accomplishments is the result of his bringing to every person in every situation an open mind, an open heart, and of course, his inimitable sense of humor. I expect I'm not the only one now trying to answer that question. What is the world trying to teach me? I offer this, that because we knew Scott Bennett, the answer is familiar to us. To be attentive to everyone, to work hard, no matter how large the task, and to laugh often, especially at ourselves. It's my honor to introduce my friend, former state senator representing the 56th District, now U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Illinois, Rochelle Odd Crow.
Hello again. On this day, as we are all in mourning, I hope that you are drawing from the strength that I am in us being unified in our admiration for Scott Bennett. And although I know that there are no words I can say that will do him justice today, I'm grateful to Stacy for being afforded the opportunity to try. Stacy, I'm so very sorry. In addition to having the honor of serving in the Senate with Scott Bennett, I hit the jackpot when I became his office mate. This afforded me considerable time with him. But most importantly, I gained a true friend, as I know many of you here did as well. I had the good fortune to witness Scott's deep and selfless commitment to public, that he both served and benefited through his strong ethical conviction and tireless dedication. These characteristics shone through in Scott most brightly when he was away from the spotlight, when he was in rooms where he toiled not for recognition, but to achieve the right result. As you've heard already today, and as Julia and Pat have both shared, Scott was well-read. He was always trying to expand his knowledge and improve himself. He was a believer that history held lessons that we could benefit from in solving modern problems. And he also loved to read to his children. Given the intensity and the depth of the many classic books that Scott read, it's ironic that the last book we discussed was Charlotte's Web. He called me the morning after reading it to Emma. This book affords as good a metaphor as any for how Scott lived his life. It's no coincidence, because the tale of Wilbur and Charlotte is about friendship, which is in and of itself emblematic of Scott in so many ways. Scott's love of reading and some of the reasons for him reading are rooted in how he could be, of all things, a better friend. He read to nurture understanding, his own understanding, and his understanding of other humans. Scott was an incredible listener. He had the rare trait of someone who listened not only to determine what their reply may be, but instead to understand the message being shared, and as often to gain insight that the message provided into the person who is sharing it so that he could understand them. He was predisposed to liking people, which is why he persisted in trying to understand them. I admired this about Scott. It's no surprise then that because Scott made so many people feel heard, understood, acknowledged, important even, that those who regarded him as friend are countless, as witnessed by all of you here today. He had the great attribute of caring so much that he made each of us feel special. And what a gift it was. But make no mistake, Scott knew who among him were true friends, and yet he treated no one differently. It's hard to think of many who are to even a few what Scott was to all of us. Let's honor Scott by asking ourselves today, how many people do we make feel special in the way that he did for each one of us? How many people do we seek to understand as much as he did each of us, if only so that he may like them, rather than persist in not knowing them and more easily judging them? It is well nigh impossible to replicate the good that Scott embodied, let alone the unique ways in which he exuded it. But a fitting tribute would be for us all to just try to model his selflessness, including so that his beloved wife, Stacy, and their two precious children may always be reminded of the gift Scott's friendship was to all who knew him, and now to all of us who treasure each memory of him. Scott's self-deprecating humor was endearing, and it bespoke his sincerity. Although he possessed the intellect to weaponize that humor, to sharpen the strong advocacy he brought to his work, he chose instead to use that humor in a way that would disarm the room, in an effort to provide the space for the best thinking to emerge and prevail for itself, regardless of what the source might be. Scott had tremendous compassion and empathy for other humans, including those he had never met. And for a person so selfless, so dedicated, so invested in making a difference in the lives of others who could not advocate for themselves, there were too many tough days as an elected official in the Capitol. Every vote that Scott took weighed heavily on him. He represented a diverse political district. and he wanted to serve them all well. We had many a long day in the Capitol, and as many trying days. My favorite part of each day was unpacking what had happened in our office with the team. He was truly skilled at using humor to far outweigh the negative. I would literally laugh until I cried, and he took great joy in making me cry at work. And yet, no matter what challenges the day brought, Scott stood ready to return to the floor the next day to overcome them, because he had unbridled optimism. As President Harmon referenced, our days often did not end when we left the Capitol. Sometimes my and Scott's calendar would not align for the evenings. On those days, I would ask him to join me. He enjoyed the dance that then ensued. He always made me ask twice. At my second ask, his line was, "Are you sure, Rochelle? You know, a little Scott Bennett goes a long way." It's my hope for each of us that the little bit of Scott Bennett that we have had will last us the long way. And if I may return to Charlotte's Web, death is something we'll all inevitably face. And though Charlotte died, it was a good death nonetheless, as she lived a fulfilling life, making a true friend, giving birth to a new generation, just as Scott has done with Stacy, who he regarded as somewhat of a superhero, and making good change in the world. Scott cultivated a lifetime of friendship into 45 years. And may God now bless him in the way that he has blessed us. It is my pleasure to invite Scott's friend and a man that he admired, Michael Frericks.
Good morning, everyone. Give me a second to adjust. In politics, some advice I received early on that I found very helpful is a quote that says, "This is a strange game, politics. There are no permanent enemies, no permanent friends, just permanent interests." And I found that advice to be very helpful, because in this business you're going to run into people you think are your friends, and sometimes they will vote against your interests. You'll find some people will anger you. You have to remember that that doesn't mean they'll always be enemies. This advice doesn't work so well with Scott, because Scott was a permanent friend. Scott was a friend before he was in the Senate. You know, about a week ago when we planned this, I was asked if I want to speak. I was like, I'm not sure I can. About 4 days ago, I thought, well, I've got this. And then, damn you, Don Harmon, you started this all over again. Scott was that best kind of friend, the one that doesn't need a modifier. He was just a friend wasn't a political friend, he wasn't a Senate friend. Just a friend. Now, this last week has been difficult. It's been difficult, too, because I'm a little selfish. You know, I look at Scott as one of my best friends. And then I hear all these people talking. Apparently, I wasn't that special. At least not to him. You know, I knew he had friends from Gibson City, but you know, they were old friends and we all have a past. And he had friends from law school, his buddies from law school. He would tell me he would go up to Chicago for a weekend, or go up for an evening and spend a night with one of his buddies up there. And that was okay because he didn't rub him in front of my face, didn't bring him around in front of me. And then he described Stacy as his best friend, and he got a pass for that one. That one really seemed to make sense. But then he went off to Springfield, and he just made friends so easily and so quickly, as if like he didn't remember who I was. And then this happens, and there's an outpouring of, as Mayor Finan said, hundreds of other friends. And it's possible you could take this personally. Well, he's here in Champaign-Urbana, just in my backyard he was making friends, other than me. But I think what this was is a sign of a man with a large heart. A man who had much love to give. And I can tell you that friendships don't just happen and continue easily. With Scott, it may have seemed that way. His humor may have deflected, it might have taken down your defenses, and maybe you thought, well, this is just easy. But it takes time, it takes love, it takes commitment, and that's something Scott had in abundance. And I can tell you, when my friend became state senator, after I became state treasurer, I was very happy. Happy for my friend, and once again, I told you I can be selfish. I was happy because I knew I would have someone in the Senate who'd return my phone calls. I'd have someone who would listen to me. I'd have a friend who might actually vote the way I asked him to. Now, so when Scott came in, our lines of communication were very open. We exchanged lots of stories. But I'm going to share with you just one story of my experience with Senator Scott Bennett in the Senate. Early in his term, he'd heard about a piece of federal legislation that was passed, allowing the state to create savings accounts for people with disabilities and giving them a much brighter future. And Senator Bennett called me and said, hey, I think this would be a good thing for your office. What do you think? I said, well, Scott, I just got elected. I've got an unclaimed property division that's really rooted in the past, it's paper bound, and I want to spend some time transforming that and bringing it into the modern era. I also have a new program to set up called Secure Choice, helping people save for their retirement. It's a brand new program, it's going to take a lot of time, and a big reason why I ran, Scott, you know, is because we want to make changes to our children's savings, our college savings accounts. And that's going to take some time. And so, Scott, I don't think I have the bandwidth to address this right now. Maybe we could work on this legislation next year. And the response from my friend was, great, I think I'm going to file that. That is 100% true. My good friend. It is emblematic of Scott, because Scott was a great legislator. And a great legislator doesn't let someone just say no and give up. You realize that when obstacles are put in your way, and there's something you want to accomplish, it may take a little pushing and a little prodding. Scott also, as a parent, had empathy for people with children with disabilities, and he didn't think that this is something that ought to wait another year or two. And Scott also, as a friend, realized something. Sometimes good friends need to push their friends. Sometimes friends know what their friends can deal with, what they're capable of, and Scott did. And so that spring we did pass Able Savings Accounts, a program that now helps tens of thousands of people with disabilities in this state have a brighter future. And we could go through many other things that Scott did that have a big impact on the state and on individuals. But that's my one experience. I know today can be a very sad day. We've all lost a great friend. But I like to think that Scott doesn't have to be gone. Scott can live on in everyone here in this room. And just as he pushed me to do more, to do better, let his life be an example to push you as well. To give more back to your communities. To commit more towards your families. And to help your friends be a better version of themselves. Because I know Scott did that for me. Now I'd like to invite up Chancellor Jones for some closing remarks.
That is our final speaker, so we have reached the conclusion of this service in Senator Scott Bennett's memory. I just want to once again offer condolences of all of us here at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, the whole University of Illinois system, and all of our education, to you, Stacy, and to Sam and Emma. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this service and allowing us this opportunity to really share our memories in tribute to Scott. And certainly it's been said several times, and I think all of us realize that today's words are not going to take away your sadness, and it will certainly not end the grief that you feel. But together we hope that you can take some small parts of what was said here today and carry it with you. And in doing so, we sincerely hope that it lets the brighter memories and the more joyful stories of Scott's life rise up and shine through. To put it simply, to use and to paraphrase a verse from an old Negro spiritual that my grandmother used to sing to us, may the life I live and the work that I've done speak for me. And certainly Scott has done that, and we're so grateful. I would ask that everyone please remain seated here in the auditorium until Stacy and her family have the chance to leave the Great Hall for some moment of privacy together. Thank you all for being here today in honor of our friend, Senator Scott Bennett. Thank you.
Oh, you're live at noon. Excuse me, let me get this cord out. Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I would just, they got pictures up there. And I have a lot of
Can I go ahead and pick up that bike?
yeah, sure, go ahead. Who was it from?
I believe former State Senator Scott Bennett.
Alright, let me got it. Store media. Store. Okay.
In politics, some advice.
Outweigh the negative. far outweigh the negative. I would literally has done with Stacy. Man,